the end of lap 13, Lewis Hamilton was 4 tenths off Ocon at turn 16. He had DRS down the straight, but he lost almost 3 tenths in the Alpine, which is obviously we know how fast it is in Sector 3. But losing 3 tenths, with DRS, that is incredible, man. That is mad. It's a weird lock-up for him. Just carrying too much speed into the corner, going off into the runoff area, and unfortunately losing position to Lewis Hamilton and Yuki Tsunoda behind them. The recovery from Seb was amazing. So obviously he made a mistake there, but the recovery, only to lose about 6 seconds overall, was mental. His little sort of pirouette to get through in the runoff area, obviously showing experience. Some drivers take a couple, moving 10-15 seconds to get out there. Seb was out in 6. And then lap 9 came around, when the race changed completely, because Carlos Sainz was out the race. He was stopped at turn 4. He had a hydraulic issue, and unfortunately for him, his bad luck continued. Hello and welcome to another edition of the SJMoores Podcast, where we, of course, today are going to break down the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. This is the 9th episode of the series, the 8th, obviously, race of the S1 season. We did one about the NFL early in the season. Apologies for the hat as well. I've got a dead trim at the moment, so I don't want to show that off particularly. But anyway, so today we're going to be talking about the Azerbaijan Grand Prix around the streets of Baku. Obviously in Azerbaijan. But as always, we're just going to go through the entire weekend in chronological order, going from practice on Friday all the way to the race on Sunday, going through the events to give my opinion on them as they unfolded, and afterwards I'm going to round it all up at the end, and then I'm going to grade the drivers as well, and also have a look at the standings in both the drivers and the Constructors' Championship. So without further ado, let's get into the Azerbaijan Grand Prix breakdown. Okay, so heading into the weekend, we thought it'd be a decent race. It normally is a decent race in Baku. Obviously 2016 was less so, but ever since 17, 18, 19 and 21 were cracking races around the streets of Baku. So the expectation was high for this one going into it. Ferrari are looking to end the long streak of Red Bull races. Obviously there's a stat at the moment going around after the race win, obviously, because Charles Leclerc did unfortunately retire and Max Verstappen did win the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. There's stuff going around at the moment saying that Max Verstappen has won more races over his career from Charles Leclerc poles, and Charles Leclerc has one from Charles Leclerc pole positions, which is mental just thinking about it. You have to feel for Charles, really, don't you? So with Monaco being 2 weeks ago, the teams have had a chance to put a few upgrades on some of the cars. So heading into the weekend, Ferrari, McLaren, Alfa Romeo, Alfa Romeo and Alpine all had new rear wings, and 4 others had rear wing updates too. And then the Mercedes and the Alpine, among them, with like the biggest packages of Mercedes and Alpine. And we'll talk about the Alpine package later on in the in the podcast. But the Alpine one was very interesting, to say the least, and we got a bit of a shock when it came to Friday in practice. So in practice 1, it was really windy for some reason, so the wind was like a massive issue sort of around the turn 15, turn 16 area. The teams were struggling with porpoising more than we've ever seen before down that long straight. Obviously, it's like almost like 2.5 kilometre straight, something like that. It's mad. Obviously they do it in about 20 seconds, but because of the nature of the straight, and also with it being obviously a street track, it's quite bumpy at some places as well. So with the porpoising added to that, it was going to be a long haul of a Grand Prix for a lot of drivers, especially the Mercedes drivers. Early in the session in FP1, Mick Schumacher pulled over to an escape road, had no power, so obviously the Ferrari power unit not going well in FP1. And obviously we saw a bit of a common theme there going through the weekend. Max Verstappen's rear wing flap was doing the same thing it was doing in Spain again, just fluttering. This time it was like bouncing though. It looked really weird, but they got to sort of adjust about it going into FP2. But yeah, Verstappen's rear wing was flapping about all over the place. It looked awful. But yeah, I expect the porpoising as well, because even Red Bull was struggling with it a little bit. That was quite a little bit of an effect to it as well, which is why it was so bad. Red Bull again were looking the best team in a straight line, as they have been all season, which really is Ferrari struggling to cope with, because around most tracks, around the sort of corners, they are the best. But Red Bull in the straight line, that car is virtually unstoppable, and that's a thing that's carried on for pretty much the majority of the season now. The Red Bull has been unbelievably quick in a straight line. Another team that was really quick in a straight line, obviously I've sort of mentioned it a little bit just a minute ago, was Alpine. They had basically had a tiny rear wing, I think like Monza spec, just trying to get as much out of the sector 3 especially of the track as possible, because that's where the time really can be made up. But yeah, Alpine's rear wing was so small and it made them go so fast in sector 3 that they were setting fast sectors everywhere. Ocon and Alonso, they were really putting on a show in FP1, and that would do for the rest of the weekend as well. But Alpine looked seriously quick, especially in sector 3. Obviously, probably the best of the rest, I'd say, on FP1 at least. AlphaTauri were also looking really strong, but you couldn't really take away much because of how windy it was in conditions wise. And then Williams looked very far on the back foot as well in FP1. A lot of teams are trying different things to sort of combat the wind. And obviously the very aggressive porpoising as well, so you can't really take anything away, like I was saying earlier, from the session. But Red Bull, from what we did see, Red Bull looked at the faster car and the faster package in FP1. So Perez was fastest in the session, Leclerc second, and Verstappen third. In FP2, obviously later in the afternoon on Friday, Ferrari looked much better. The wind was a little bit less in FP2 as well. Alpine was still rapid in sector 3, the fastest through the speed trap every single time they went through it. I think they had like 340 kph going through there, which is mental for, obviously it's a very long straight, but still. There were some teams who were really struggling in sector 3 as well, though. The most obvious of those, I'd say, would be McLaren, who were the slowest through the speed trap for the majority of the weekend, in fact, really, through sector 3. Mercedes, Alpine and AlphaTauri all look quicker than them throughout the whole of Friday. Alex Albon missed out on a chunk of the session in FP2 as well. He hit the wall coming out of turn 16, so he went out of turn 16 going to almost joining the straight, and then where it sort of there's the kink in it where it goes round, but it's like a high speed section throughout the wall, and it's basically a corner. I think it's 17, 18, that sort of area. Yeah, Albon got so close to the wall that he actually broke the wheel cover off his tyre, and obviously there was more damage to the suspension of that car as well. So they did actually have to look at it, and he was pretty much out for the rest of the session, was Alex Albon. It wasn't looking great for Haas either, or Alfa Romeo. They weren't where they've been pretty much the most of the season. They were closer to Williams than they were the midfield for Haas and Alfa Romeo, especially in FP2 as well. So they had a little bit to work on going into Saturday's FP3. So because of the crash in the first F2 race on Saturday morning, practice and qualifying were both delayed by 15 minutes on Saturday. So FP3 began 15 minutes later than it should have done, and as they're qualifying later on in the afternoon as well. God, I can't get my words out today. The conditions were very different in FP3, a lot less windy. Obviously, the next day it reduced for FP2, but for FP3 it was like gone, all the wind. they made a big deal out of it, Crofty, and I think Damon Hill was on comms saying it as well, and Johnny Herbert as well. They were all making a big deal of it being the windy city. Obviously, in America it's Chicago, which is the windy city, but yeah, apparently Baku's a windy city. But no, so the conditions were different, very warm, typical Baku in June weather that you'd expect, and what it would be on Sunday as well. It was a very important session because obviously the FP2 and FP1 were hampered by the wind. So this is where we can see where the cars really probably were. And obviously a lot of the teams worked quite vigorously overnight as well. You would have thought they did as well, because a lot of the order did change. It was a much better session for McLaren and Mercedes. They looked to be the best of the rest this time, rather than Alpine and AlphaTauri. McLaren particularly, Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris are 5th and 6th in FP3. And other than that, it was pretty similar. AlphaTauri going well, Alpine going well, but not as well in FP3, which is an interesting one, because they must have changed their setup a little bit too much on Saturday, and did sort of take away a little bit of performance away on Saturday, unfortunately for the Alpine, unless they were just held up by the wind hitting their really tiny rear wing. But no, yeah, so Ferrari looked actually the quicker in FP3 as well. I think Charles Leclerc led the session. I could be wrong on that, but I seem to remember. But yeah, in FP3, pretty much the same as before. Haas and Alfa struggling, but McLaren and Mercedes were the big gainers on Saturday morning. I've just said actually Sergio Perez was faster, but literally 700th of a second faster than Leclerc, so it was still very close between Ferrari and Red Bull, but overall I think Ferrari looked the better package, and it would come down to ultimately the driver on the laps in Q3, really. Yeah, that's what it'll come down to. Okay, so into quali now. Obviously only a couple hours after practice 3, and the track temperature was actually 14 degrees cooler than FP3, so it had come down a little bit in temperature, so we would maybe see a little bit of a jumble upgrade from what we were expecting in FP3 anyway. It's one of those tracks as well, Baku, where the teams steal the cars from multiple runs, especially in Q1 as well, because you can get caught out by yellow flag like that. We saw in 2018, so I just looked back at that race recently. Kimi Raikkonen had 3 or 4 attempts just ruined by yellow flags, and looking up, him making mistakes. In Q2, for example, when he had to go onto the ultra soft when the rest of the top 6 at the time had to go or went on the super soft for the race start. It's yeah, so like Monaco, Baku is one of those ones where you can get caught out on a lot very easily. The track evolves it can evolve into, especially towards the end of the session as well. You've got to make sure that before then you've got a very good lap away. Otherwise, you're going to have to come out. That's just the way it works. And Baku normally, the majority of the cars will be out at the end of Q1. And also, a red flag is actually normally likely at Baku as well. 4 out of the 5 qualifying sessions in Baku have had a red flag previously. One other thing to note as well is the fact, obviously, that the slipstream is very powerful in Baku. If you can pull off a toe or get a little bit of slipstream, that is worth a couple of attempts as well. So teams will be looking, or teams and drivers will be looking to take advantage of that as much as possible. Sometimes as well, people go for 2 warm-up laps around Baku just to get the tyres to ultimate temperature to do the race, obviously, as well. To do the qualifying laps, obviously not the race, but obviously with the fact that especially in Q1 as well, the cars are fueled for the majority of the session. You come in once and then you're out for 6 minutes towards the end or whatever it is. Normally, it allows you to do 2 warm-up laps to get the best out of the tyres, basically. God, my road is busy today, isn't it? Anyway, enough of the talking about qualifying. Let's actually get into Q1. So after the first couple of runs, the Red Bull were looking to have the extra edge over Ferrari in Q1. Verstappen was finding something that he couldn't find all weekend. He was fastest of all with 5 minutes to go, and Sergio Perez was P2. At that time as well, the eliminations over 5 minutes to go was Schumacher, Stroll, Latifi, Bottas, Albon from 20th to 16th. And with 4 minutes to go, Lance Stroll basically put his chances of qualification at serious jeopardy in that Aston Martin. Obviously, the improved Aston Martin that's been going well the last couple of weekends. Stroll had an off with 4 minutes to go, locking up at turn 8, and the car just didn't turn. He had a load of understeer. A Mayer front wing damage as well. Obviously, he tapped the wall, managed to get out of it in turn 8, which is a very interesting corner to do that. But he wasn't the only Aston Martin to have that actually over the weekend, which was interesting. But and it said like BBW for both Stroll and brake bar failure, if you don't know, for both Stroll and Vettel, and Vettel had the same problem later on. It was an interesting one. That's an error. It didn't hamper them in the race, but it is an interesting one, thinking about it with the Aston Martin, obviously, that both drivers had the same issue on Saturday in qualifying. But anyway, so Stroll managed to get out of the wall. Obviously, it was yellow flag at the time as well, and managed to get around the track. And was that all? We all thought, Sky thought, Paul Resta and David Croft thought that he was going to come in and just have basically make it a race against time to go out for another lap towards the end, change the front wing, just make sure everything isn't damaged. But Stroll actually continued. Yeah, so he started his warm-up lap after going around, obviously ignoring, thinking that he's okay. He started his warm-up lap for a final push. But he actually had a much worse, but also similar incident at turn 2. This time it was a lot more damage, still had a little bit of understeer as well. And basically just went straight into the wall at turn 2. His front wing flew off, and obviously at that point that brought out the red flag, making it 5 or 6 qualifying sessions in Baku with a red flag. His front wing was just scattered across the track with a load of debris as well, so they had to come out and clear it, leaving 2 minutes 30 remaining on the clock for teams to go out and have a lap. So there was going to be a dash basically to the checker flag to see if anyone can get a lap away, just to make sure that their times would improve to try and get into Q2. It was literally almost the exact same situation as what happened in Monaco 2 weeks ago after the Checo Perez. No, it wasn't Perez. Perez was it done at the end of the session? Who was it? After the Schumacher crash after Mick Schumacher crash in qualifying, it was the same situation as that. The bottom 5 remained the same going into the final rush of 2 minutes 30 remaining in Q1. Magnussen and Tsunoda, and also the two McLarens, Ricciardo and Norris, and 14th and 12th were the cars that were most at risk of elimination going into the final shootout in Q1. Especially Vettel and Zhou Guanyu were doing great, being P5 and P6, and the Aston Martin and Alfa Romeo, they looked safe. But they obviously went out as well just to be safe in Q1. So the green flag was waved, meaning that obviously we can get back to the session, and everyone just about made it round, unlike in Monaco, to set a lap to try and make sure they're in Q2. Although because of that, at first it was looking like not many of the cars would actually improve because they were just too bunched together around the track. track. Valtteri Bottas made it through just in P15. Obviously, looked like he was going to be one of the ones eliminated when with 2 minutes 30 left to go. Everybody else was hampered potentially by Alonso going off at turn 15 at the runoff area, and the absolute housery from Fernando Alonso doing that. Alex Albon thought he did it on purpose, and I kind of agree with Alex as well. I think someone told me Fernando actually admitted it in an interview as well, so I'll have to check that out. I'm not sure, but that's mad to think. But yeah, so Fernando ruined a lot of people's laps. Mick Schumacher, Latifi, Albon, Magnussen among those that had their laps compromised or couldn't pick up the pace, unfortunately. So the all eliminated. So obviously Lance Stroll was eliminated anyway, but he did have a lap on the board and actually did out-qualify Mick Schumacher. So Mick Schumacher would start the race at the back of the grid. Then it was with Latifi and Albon. The two Williams would start on the ninth row of the grid, and then Kevin Magnussen qualified in P16, unfortunately for the Haas driver. So 2 Haas's, 2 Williams, and an Aston Martin out, which crashed out in qualifying. Not really a surprise there. But yeah, Zhou Guanyu in Q2 was a massive achievement. He was driving great all weekend, and obviously the Alpha looked dead and buried in the majority of practice, but they had two Alfa Romeos just about Bottas in Q2. Oh, and Pierre Gasly and George Russell were among those that actually did improve their lap as well in Q1. And Valtteri Bottas just about extended his Q1 streak of racing. Just about. Obviously, he's not been eliminated at Q1 for a very long time. So, Q2. Q2 and 3 are more of a normal qualifying session around Baku. Sometimes you'll have 3 runs rather than 2 runs tops, but there's not enough time, and also there's not enough time to be fueled for the majority of the session, unlike in Q1 in Baku and Monaco and Singapore, whatever, is just wild normally. So there's usually just 2 push laps in Q2. After 1 run, Carlos Sainz was the fastest car, so Ferrari actually showing pace, with Charles Leclerc being the 2nd fastest car after the first run in Q2. It was closer than thought in Q1. Red Bull looked like the faster car by miles in Q1, but Ferrari really turned up in Q2. Verstappen and Perez were right behind them, as Verstappen faster than Perez as well. He's not been faster than Perez the majority of the weekend. Valtteri Bottas and Guan Yu Zhou didn't set a lap in the first run, didn't have enough tyres to do that. Obviously Alpha I don't think really expected to be in Q2 at the time. And 0.1 and literally almost just under 0.2 of a second separated the top 4, showing how close it was. Around Baku is one of the longest tracks where times the gap is stretched out. For example, the gap between the top 4 and the midfield, we saw in the end of Q3 was literally a second, or 9/10 or whatever it was. It's not normally that big, but because of Baku being was it 3rd longest circuit on the calendar, maybe even 2nd longest, I can't really remember. It's one of those two. Because of how long of a track it is, those gaps are extended further than normal. But anyway, I was going on about Sebastian Vettel having a similar issue to Lance Stroll, and he did obviously. He was sitting P7, so looked to be through to Q3. I had a lock up turn in the corner. At turn 15, hitting the wall at turn 15. Is turn 15, not turn 8 this time, like it was with Lance. He was able to get to the pit lane though to have a check for the final run as well. So a lucky escape for Seb, and obviously getting into the pit lane, unlike what Lance did as well. That just sort of shows the experience as well. Good old Seb. So ahead of the final runs, the bottom 5 was Bottas and Zhou, obviously, who hadn't set a lap, and then Ricciardo, Ocon, and Lewis Hamilton as well in P11. And also, to be fair, Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu did actually get a lap in before the final run, but they just went later in the session. So I did get so obviously when I'm writing these live, that didn't focus, but Zhou and Bottas did get a lap in. So it was 14th for Zhou and Bottas 15th. So obviously Zhou having a better weekend than his teammate, obviously with all the experience of Valtteri, and obviously normally how good Valtteri is over 1 lap. Obviously out qualifying Lewis, quite a lot of the time, not the majority of the time, probably 1 every 4 or 5 races. I'd probably say Valtteri did out qualify Lewis, but Valtteri over 1 lap, he's had many pole positions, or he had many pole positions in his time at Mercedes. Sergio Perez got another one in 2 before the final run, and he was the fastest in the session at the time as well. So on the final runs, Lewis Hamilton got a slipstream from George Russell, obviously his teammate, who looked safely through, giving Lewis Hamilton a little bit of a tow just to make sure that Lewis is into Q3, and he went out to P7. Esteban Ocon, Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu were some of the first to cross the line. They were out straight away. They couldn't improve on the time or get into the top 10 at the time, so they were instantly out. Then the 2 McLarens were the last to cross the line. They were so, it was touch and go whether the McLarens would get into Q2 or not. Into Q3, or not. Daniel Ricciardo improved, but only went up to P12. And Lando Norris couldn't improve. And unfortunately for Lando, he got caught out. And the two McLarens were out in Q2, unfortunately. Lewis Hamilton obviously knocking Lando Norris into Q2. Or sorry, into the elimination zone in Q2. But unfortunately for Lando, his qualifying was over. Out qualifying his teammate by only a couple of attempts. But so eliminated in Q2 as Valtteri Bottas 15th, Zhou 14th, Ocon 13th, Ricciardo 12th, and Norris 11th. The FIA were looking into Lewis Hamilton getting penalised for holding up Norris and Ricciardo. Obviously, with the pace that we're showing in FP3, McLaren believed that could have been a factor being held up by Lewis, who was driving by their thought unnecessarily slowly. Obviously, they might have thought after the pace that they did in FP3 on Saturday morning that they could have been in Q3 and it might have hampered them. So McLaren did actually ask them to have a look at that, but it was deemed not important. Okay, so Q3, both AlphaTauris in Q3. Obviously, I said they looked strong on Friday. Less so on Saturday, but wasn't FP3 on Saturday morning. But AlphaTauri were having a very good weekend. At the start of the weekend anyway. Sebastian Vettel as well in the Aston Martin, obviously up to Q3. For Seb, yeah, that's mental for him. Obviously, a couple of weeks ago, obviously he had COVID at the start, but at the start of the season when it was Nico and Stroll, Aston Martin looked buried to be either the 9th or 10th fastest car with obviously competing at the back of the group of Williams. That's not the case now. Obviously they've got the sort of Red Bull B, although I don't think Red Bull are investigating that at the moment. I think that's sort of gone a bit hush hush at the moment, which is decent for them because obviously this Aston Martin is going very well, and Seb is getting the best out of it. By the looks of things. Seb getting the Aston Martin into Q3. And then Alonso obviously through as expected because the Alpine was showing a lot of good pace on Friday. But Esteban Ocon, obviously, that is a small rear wing on the Alpine couldn't get him into Q3. And he actually did. He was a lot further off Fernando this weekend than he has been in other tracks. Obviously, he has got more points than Fernando, but Fernando, in my opinion anyway, has been a better driver this season. He's just been incredibly unlucky. So on to the first one in Q3. Obviously, there's normally 2 in Baku because of the time, the time limit. Obviously, because Q3 is 6 minutes shorter than Q1. So because of the time limit, only 2 laps normally in Q3. And after the first run, it was only Ferrari and Red Bull that you can actually really judge because they're the only ones with new tyres, and obviously not the used tyres. So it was Carlos Sainz in provisional pole. Surprisingly, he had a great lap, and Charles Leclerc was 0.04 of a second behind him. So the Ferrari again looking the faster car like it did in Q2, but not in Q1. But Leclerc could have gone faster. He had a bit of a sliding up the castle section, so Charles Leclerc was expected to go faster in the second run in Q3. A great lap from Sainz, obviously, but he's been on professional pole before, not had a pole position yet in Formula 1, but it was shown that he is more on top of the car than he has been at points this season nowadays. Red Bull were really struggling in Sector 1. The Red Bull and Ferrari were similar in Sector 2, and then the Red Bull was very fast in Sector 3, so that's where you can sort of see where the teams are dominant over the parts of the track. And on the used tyres for all the other teams, so Pierre Gasly was the fastest in P5, Russell, Vettel, Hamilton, Alonso and Tsunoda making up the order there, but it will probably get shook up on the new tyres at the end of in the second one in Q3. So as all the drivers got away on their push lap, unfortunately for Carlos Sainz, he was already 4/10 down on his push lap by the time Sector 2 came round because he touched the wall, and Charles Leclerc was 1/10 up, but Max Verstappen also had a good first sector as well on their obviously the last push lap. Charles Leclerc getting into the second sector was 5/10 up on Carlos Sainz's professional pole time, so Leclerc was going to smash that. And he went fastest, obviously, at the time, but obviously Verstappen and Perez were right behind him. Max Verstappen did improve, but not enough to match Charles Leclerc's unbelievable lap time. But he did actually out-qualify Carlos Sainz, who obviously didn't set a very good second run. But he did also get out-qualified by Sergio Perez, out-qualifying Max for the second weekend in a row. You got to say fair play to him. Checo's really finding a groove at the moment in the Red Bull, and it probably is more suited to him than Max. It's not as sort of jumpy on the front end as the last year's car was, and Checo is proving a lot of entertainment for a lot of neutrals as well at the moment, which is really good for from the old Mexican. Well, he's not really entertaining, it's kind of odd, but you know what I mean. The Carlos Sainz mistake, grazing the wall, was costly. It literally cost him 3 positions. He's gone down to P4 now. Sainz. I don't think he would have beaten Leclerc, but he could have been alongside him on the front row, obviously doing a lockout for Ferrari. He could have done that, and unfortunately for Carlos, he would start in P4 behind obviously the two Red Bulls, and that was basically his race weekend maybe over, because I don't think he'd be able to match the race pace of the Red Bull or Charles going in on Sunday. Anyway, going into the best of the rest was George Russell qualifying P5 with Pierre Gasly putting his AlphaTauri in between him and Lewis Hamilton in P7. Yuki Tsunoda was in P8, Sebastian Vettel P9. I mean, you got Fernando Alonso now unfortunately P10. So the Aston Martin ahead of the Alpine in qualifying, which is interesting. Obviously setting up the grid for Sunday. I don't really know what happened with Alonso's pace. Like I said, they must have changed him overnight, because the Alpine was looking amazing, unless it was just a win that was, boosting a lap time. On Friday, it's mad to think a little bit of a drop off. They look like they could qualify like 6th and 7th, at the start, and 10th and 13th is obviously a little bit of a way off that. And it was a mighty lap from Charles Leclerc. That's my final words on it. What a lap from Charles. Obviously, he's in a couple this season. This one's up there. The Checo one in Jeddah was amazing as well. Fair play to Charles Leclerc. Yeah. So anyway, that set up the grid for Sunday, and obviously the story heading into the race was whether Ferrari speed in the first two sectors would be enough to hold off the Red Bulls straight line speed, which it hasn't been in a lot of the tracks this season. Obviously, Ferrari have been struggling with reliability more rate than Red Bull, but Red Bull reliability has also been an issue at some point as well. But on the setups, which is basically been all season now, Ferrari's corner speed versus Red Bull's straight line speed, which is the better? The race was looking like a one stop, but you never know with Baku. Obviously, safety cars, red flags, anything can happen. So a lot of the time, strategy is just thrown out the window. But it was looking like either a soft hard, a medium hard, or a hard medium one stop strategy for teams. And they went for the last two actually. So Daniel Ricciardo, Esteban Ocon, Valtteri Bottas, Lance Stroll, and Mick Schumacher were on the hards, with the rest of the grid on mediums. So as the lights went out, Sergio Perez got a better start off the line, the better reaction time off the front row, and looks to have the lead into turn one as Charles Leclerc locks up. Unfortunately for Charles, he tried to go around the outside, but locked up at the time and was vulnerable to Max Verstappen on the back of him into turn two. But he was helped out by his teammate Carlos Sainz going for a dummy on Max, which Max went over to defend. Sebastian Vettel got past the AlphaTauri of Yuki Tsunoda on the first lap, as Alex Albon and Lance Stroll also made up places. Albon up the 1, Stroll up the 2, and Kevin Magnussen down 2, and Nicholas Latifi was also down 1 as well. Going into lap 2, Alex Albon made it 2 positions up, overtaking Valtteri Bottas into turn 1. The Williams having the great start. Obviously, Valtteri Bottas on the hard as well, struggling on his hard tyres. Whilst Kevin Magnussen got Lance Stroll back into turn 2 as well. The Haas faring better than the Aston Martin, obviously on the hard tyres as well. On lap 3, we saw Nicholas Latifi revealed to being given a 10-second penalty, stop-go from penalty actually, for one of his team members. I guess it was the mechanic who's been touching his car after the 15-second warning went, as the red lights go on. So unfortunately for him, obviously that's not allowed before the start with the mechanics touching the car within 15 seconds. So Latifi was given a 10-second stop-go penalty for that. Daniel Ricciardo and Esteban Ocon, meanwhile, obviously were getting away really well on their hard tyres. They were doing better with the warm-up than Valtteri Bottas and Lance Stroll were, and they were in good stead for the rest of the race. But the start it looked like it anyway. And then to end lap 3, Max Verstappen looked to have the DRS on Leclerc going down to turn 1, but unfortunately he lost 2 tenths between 15 and 16. So I'm not really sure what happened there. As Nicholas Latifi also came in at the end of the lap to serve the stop go as well. On lap 4, Daniel Ricciardo was on the hards and he had a go at Lando Norris on them into turn 1. He didn't risk it though, obviously, playing a team game, and also he was too far back as well, and he was on the slower tyre as well. But Daniel Ricciardo having really good pace and looking to get past his teammates on the hard tyres on lap 4. Towards the end of the lap as well, Max Verstappen just about got within DRS range of Leclerc, but going into the turn 1 on lap 5 was too far back on Charles Leclerc at turn 1. He had a look into turn 3, but the straight was not long enough to have a go on the monogas driver, or at the monogas driver. Meanwhile, Valtteri Bottas his start on the hard tyre has got even worse, as Kevin Magnussen has also squeezed past on the Haas a couple of laps ago. A terrible start from the 2019 winner, of course. His hard just went up to temperature at the time. And then Magnussen as well was making his way out the field as well, because on lap 6 he got past Alex Albon for P15. A very good start to the race for the Dane. At this time as well, Lewis Hamilton was eking closer to Pierre Gasly, whilst Verstappen wasn't close enough to make a move on Leclerc. And Lewis Hamilton actually made a mistake whilst chasing down Gasly, meaning that he wasn't in DRS range like Verstappen was on Leclerc just earlier, and unfortunately didn't have DRS at the end of lap 6. On lap 7, obviously Leclerc now has got Max right at the back of him. He's getting closer and closer, but the two of them are actually getting closer to Sergio Perez at the time as well, because Checo was actually struggling with traction, which obviously for him that's very, very unusual for him. Obviously normally, especially around street circuits as well, Checo's the king of tyre management. So unfortunately for him, his tyres were starting to go off on lap 7 for Checo. So he was obviously being ultra conservative with them and was slowing down. So Verstappen and Leclerc are both heading towards Verstappen's teammate, which has spurred Leclerc on a bit more, obviously with him getting closer to Perez, but his main focus obviously was defending his title rival Max Verstappen behind him. But yes, Lewis Hamilton was actually recovering from his mistake as well by the time of lap 7, so he was actually 2 seconds behind Pierre Gasly by the end of that lap. Then Ricciardo, who was still within DRS range of Lando Norris, was told to drop back on lap 7 as well. So Norris didn't actually risk losing position to Esteban Ocon, who was obviously the other hard tyre runner that has started well behind Daniel and behind Lando, of course, as well. Ricciardo complained, saying that he had way more pace than Lando, asking to go past, but unfortunately for the Aussie, he was unfortunately not allowed to pass his British teammate. So obviously after Lewis Hamilton's mistake chasing down Gasly, he actually allowed the window of Sebastian Vettel, obviously his title rival from 2017 and 2018 as well, not really in 19, but Lewis's old title rival, Sebastian Vettel, was getting closer to Lewis Hamilton in the Aston Martin on lap 8. Sky suggests that he could be struggling with tyres too. Obviously Lewis, he might have had a lock up or something chasing down Gasly, which is why he was going a little bit slowly. And then lap 9 came around when the race changed completely, because Carlos Sainz was out the race. He was stopped at turn 4. He had a hydraulic issue, and unfortunately for him, his bad luck continued. Interestingly, his dash said brake by wire issue, and obviously he said that on the radio to him as well, but no, it was a hydraulic issue, but it was a similar one to the Aston Martins on Saturday actually, so it was very interesting for Carlos. But he was stopped at turn 4, and obviously for him, the hydraulic problem meant that he couldn't get out of it, unfortunately. So the VSC was deployed and Carlos Sainz was out of the race. So Charles Leclerc, at this point, he looked like he was going to get passed by Max Verstappen, so he dove in for a cheap stop on lap 9. He was going to lose the position to Max at some point anyway, so just try and maybe win by strategy, which for Ferrari's term, they don't normally they do try and normally win by strategy, but don't do very well. So this was an interesting take by Ferrari, going on, trying to go to the end on the hards. He would need to do 42 laps on those hard tyres as well, which is interesting. So it was touch and go, but if it worked, it would have been a really good call from the Ferrari, obviously hoping that there wasn't a safety car, or if there was a safety car, actually hoping that they were still ahead of Verstappen to dive in and pit at the end as well. But it was a slow stop for Leclerc, 5 seconds, but with the 10-second loss in the pit stop, it didn't really matter. 10-second gain in the pit stop with the VSC, rather than obviously doing it normally, it didn't really matter as much as it normally would do, having a 2.5 second sort of more stop. That was also because the front jack wouldn't move for Leclerc, unfortunately. George Russell and Pierre Gasly were also in as well. They went for the same strategy as Leclerc, as did Hamilton, Vettel and Tsunoda as well. So obviously all the front runners behind behind the two Red Bulls, going for the same strategy as well, which would be very interesting towards the end of the race. It was actually the Red Bull pit crew who actually started this all as well, because as soon as the VSC was called, they actually brought out the pit crew, obviously potentially for either Verstappen or I guess Perez, and more logical at the time of how dusty his tyres were at the time. So Red Bull actually brought out the pit crew, but then dummied, and obviously everybody else came out after that as well. So that's an interesting thing. I wonder what would have happened if Red Bull did bring in Perez specifically. Maybe he could have. I think Max was on another level, obviously, in the race, but maybe Perez could have posed a different threat to him towards the end of the race. Who knows? Obviously, that would have given Perez, I guess, the net lead of the race as well if there wasn't a safety car or another VSC to get Max in as well. Like, maybe it could have been different, but obviously it didn't happen, so we'll stop talking about it. Did they dummy Ferrari to come in early? I think they probably did, thinking about it. Further down as well, Zhou Guanyu, Magnussen, Albon and Mick Schumacher all came in for the tyres as well. So we got the green flag or the green light to resume racing at the end of lap 10 with Sergio Perez 2.3 seconds behind his teammate Max Verstappen, who was in P1 at the time. Charles Leclerc was 13 seconds behind Verstappen, meaning obviously if Verstappen came in soon, he would lose position to Leclerc, so that was an interesting one. and then Charles Leclerc would actually go and start to reduce that gap as well on the new tyres as well. So the only ones that stayed out, obviously, the Red Bull, the Alpine and the McLaren drivers, and also the other hub runners as well. So Bottas and Stroll, they were the only ones that actually stayed out. So that sort of shook up the grid a little bit, putting the likes of Alonso, Ricciardo and Norris a little bit higher up, but obviously they were let to come in so that it would go back to how it normally would eventually. Importantly for Mercedes, George Russell remained P4 with a stop, whilst Vettel jumped Lewis Hamilton under the VSC, which was interesting as well. Obviously, he was closing on Lewis as well. Unfortunately for Gasly, who obviously was behind Russell a little bit, he had the three cars of Ricciardo, Norris and Alonso in between him and Russell, who obviously were net P4 and P5. So so Mercedes had a blinder getting Russell out in P4 in front of those three cars, and obviously that basically secured P4 for him at that point in the race as well. Although Pierre Gasly was unfortunately hampered by the fact that he had three cars between him and George Russell. Luckily for him, he had Esteban Ocon between him and Vettel and Hamilton, who were behind him, obviously trying to chase him down. So there's a little bit of a relief for Gasly there. So obviously with Seb and Lewis on newer tyres, they were going to get to Ocon eventually, and by the end of lap 12, they were on the back of him. Unfortunately for them, the Alpine was so hard to pass through sector 3 with the speed into turn 1, so they'd have to either go to turn 3 or build it up over a couple of laps. To be able to make a move, because that Alpine was so hard to pass. So yeah, there was a better chance of it being done in turn 3 for them, but just because of how overpowered the Alpine was into turn 1. On lap 13, Vettel was closer to Ocon than he was on the previous lap at turn 1. He was close enough at 2 to have it go into 3, and the move looked done. The move looked done for Sebastian Vettel. He was miles ahead at the turning point, but he locked up weirdly as well. It's a weird lock up for him, just carrying too much speed into the corner, going off into the runoff area, and unfortunately losing position to Lewis Hamilton and Yuki Tsunoda behind them. The recovery from Seb was amazing. So obviously he made a mistake there, but the recovery, only to lose about 6 seconds overall, was mental. His little sort of pirouette to get through in the runoff area, obviously showing experience. Some drivers take a couple, moving 10-15 seconds to get out there. Seb was out in 6, only losing 2 positions. Obviously it did, I guess, hamper his chances of getting P4 or P5 at the end of the race. But yeah, fair play to Seb for getting out of his situation so quickly. So yeah, obviously that freed up Lewis Hamilton to have a go at Esteban Ocon now, but unfortunately for Seb, he had fallen behind Tsunoda and Hamilton down to P12. So at the end of lap 13, Lewis Hamilton was 4 tenths off Ocon at turn 16. He had DRS down the straight, but he lost almost 3 tenths in the Alpine, which is obviously we know how fast it is in sector 3. But losing 3 tenths, with DRS, that is incredible, man. That is mad. And also on lap 14 as well, whilst this is all going on, Hamilton chasing down Ocon. Zhou Guanyu got past Lance Stroll for P14, almost catching Bottas as well, obviously, and obviously Zhou stopped as well. So Zhou having a great race, way better than his teammate Bottas at this point as well. But a quick cut as well, obviously Zhou getting past Stroll, a quick cut as well to Max Verstappen, who was literally centimetres behind Sergio Perez. And Verstappen, by the end of the straight, was up to P1. Checo was told no fighting, so ultimately, I think Checo actually lost a second to Max in the lap previous, so Max was probably going to get him eventually. But the fact that Red Bull basically said, just let Max pass, I'm not really a fan of that. But yeah, so Verstappen took the race at the end of that 14, and would obviously go on to win it as well. But just going down the inside of about fight from Checo, unfortunately for Max at turn 1. But yeah, he was 1 second. He was 1 second faster than him in the lap previous. So Checo struggling on the tyres as well. So he was told not to fight. And Max Verstappen took the race lead. While this is all going on as well, by lap 15, Charles Leclerc again 6 seconds on Verstappen in 4 laps. He was absolutely rapid, making up time as well, looking that he could have a go at potentially Verstappen and Perez in a little bit of time. And also Zhou Guanyu actually got past Bottas on lap 16 for P13. An awesome weekend from Zhou all round, and I was so happy for him as well. Obviously being a rookie at the time, it was awesome. Obviously he's a rookie now, but I was so happy for him at the time of him being a rookie. Obviously beating Valtteri Bottas at a circuit he's won is an impressive feat for him. So on lap 17, obviously Sergio Perez's tyres are dead. They've been dead for about 10 laps or so now. So Red Bull actually found a window to get him out ahead of George Russell on P4. Unfortunately for them, a little bit of unfortunately, it was only just in front of George Russell because they made the stop a little bit slower than expected. It's about 4 seconds or so the stop, so it was a bit of a slower stop. But they found a winner to get him ahead of George Russell and obviously not losing position. Well, obviously not losing position to Leclerc, but obviously not losing position, crucially to Russell. And Checo was out just into P4 at the time, obviously net P3 as well. But yeah, unfortunately for Red Bull, it was a little bit closer than they would have liked, Perez against Russell. If Russell had DRS, he could have even potentially got past Sergio Perez at the time into turn 3, which would have been interesting. But yeah, that was an interesting one. We're also starting to see a little bit of a DRS train behind Fernando Alonso. Obviously, no one can pass him because of how fast he is in the Alpine. So obviously Ricciardo's fully caught Lando Norris now within 5 or 6 tenths behind him, but Norris is also 5 or 6 tenths behind Alonso, and he can't overtake him because of how quick the Alpine is in sector 3. Ricciardo really not happy about getting past Lando Norris. Now he feels that he can take Alonso, with him being on the on the hard tyres, but really finding a groove with them. He feels like he could have potentially had a go at Fernando, and also with Pierre Gasly closing behind him, obviously because Alonso's being Alonso and holding everyone up. Ricciardo's basically, his race is getting ruined by second by second because obviously Lando. They're trying to protect obviously Lando from losing position as well, but to Gasly, but unfortunately for Ricciardo, he had to sacrifice that at that time, that moment in time. On lap 14, we saw Kevin Magnussen overtake Valtteri Bottas for P14. Obviously, Magnussen came in for the stop when everybody else did. And just not the weekend for Valtteri Bottas, unfortunately, down to P14 at the time. It seems a little while ago now, but obviously, remember Lewis Hamilton was chasing down Esteban Ocon. He was much closer to Ocon on lap 18. Sorry, literally 2 tenths behind him at turn 1, and as it going to turn 3, like Sebastian Vettel did, squeezed down the inside of Lewis Hamilton, and it was a lovely move, getting ahead of the Frenchman, and he was free to chase down Pierre Gasly again. But yeah, it took Lewis a little bit of time to chase down Ocon. Obviously, incredibly difficult. Obviously, we know you can't get past the Alpine into turn 1. It has to be turn 3. And Lewis did an almost identical move to Vettel, but obviously this time he pulled it off. Squeeze down the inside was great move. Probably one of the moves of the weekend. If not, the Snowden one was pretty good as well. Also on Ocon, but he was free to chase down Pierre Gasly again. More importantly for Lewis Hamilton. So Max Verstappen came in a lap later after Perez. He may as well now because Leclerc's picking up the time. Obviously, he's not stopped as well. Perez has stopped as well, and obviously his tyre's going to go off soon as well. So he was 13 seconds behind Leclerc. So that was an interesting one, and he was 3 ahead of Perez. Obviously, with all 3 of them stopping, it was whether Leclerc could make a 13-second gap last until the end of the race. That was the question at the time. Verstappen came in much better stop than Perez as well. It was literally 2.5 seconds, so about a second and a half quicker than the Perez stop. Obviously, that's interesting as well because Perez would have been about a second behind him if his stop wasn't slower. So that's an interesting one. So obviously that was setting up the battle. Now, will Charles Leclerc be able to last to the end of the race with the race lead? And also how quickly will it take Max Verstappen to sort of chalk down that 13-second lead or so that Charles Leclerc had? It was setting up a pretty at the time as well. It was a pretty sort of dull start to the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, and this was sort of the start of it starting to liven up for a bit. Obviously, it didn't last very long, but this was the start of the the redemption arc of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Another driver to come in on lap 18 as well was Fernando Alonso, releasing the two McLarens, but obviously releasing them ready to be caught by Pierre Gasly, as obviously Gasly was right in the back of Ricciardo. Alonso came in on lap 18. Obviously, his tyres are dead at this point as well, as are Ocon's really as well. Obviously, those boys haven't stopped yet. But yeah, so the next couple of laps were crucial for Daniel Ricciardo. He had to get past Lando because otherwise his race would be ruined because Gasly was behind him. Gasly and Lando are on the same strategy. Ricciardo's not. If he's lapping well still, if he can get past Lando, then he probably will. He has a chance to finish ahead of Gasly. A great result for Ricciardo at the time. When the pressure's on him as well, he has to get past Lando. And he had a look on lap 20. He had a look to go down the inside of Lando Norris, but unfortunately he wasn't allowed to. And but obviously TheSJMoores was, and he sort of closed the DRS before the turning point as well. For him, closed the DRS obviously earlier than it would close normally. Just making sure that he wouldn't either go into Lando or overtake him. From what he's told anyway, he's keeping Lando in position, but also helping him overcut Alonso. He's told he has to sit behind him for some more, so he can overcut Alonso. He was brought into traffic, obviously, even though he was at risk of Pierre Gasly basically screwing over Ricciardo. And whilst Daniel was told that, unfortunately, another Ferrari was at the race. Charles Leclerc, the second Ferrari to retire on lap 20, and it was an engine blowout. His engine had overheated, and he was crawling back to the pit lane on the straight. Obviously, you could see his engine was smoking, and unfortunately for Charles, he made it back to the pits, but he was out of the race. Just a double DNF for Ferrari. The championship over, potentially. Certainly the constructors is at the moment, because, the top two in the championship right now are Verstappen and Perez. George Russell's only 17 points behind Charles Leclerc at the moment in the championship as well. It's... Yeah. I feel, for Tifosi, I'm so sorry, man. It looks like Ferrari are probably blowing it again, because they have probably the faster package, especially over one lap. Charles Leclerc has 6 pole positions this season from 8 races. 6 in 8 races. I mean, Max has got 1. Max has got 1 pole position all season. Checo's got the other one. Leclerc has 6. That is, but unfortunately for Charles, he's not won since Australia. He's not won since Australia. After Australia, it was a 34-point swing in Leclerc's favour. He was 34 points ahead of Verstappen. Now, after Baku, he's 34 points behind Verstappen. Wow. I feel sorry for everyone around Ferrari. I just do. Ferrari fans, people who don't like Red Bull as well, really. It looks like Ferrari might blow it, and it looks like a little bit as well that probably, I think Red Bull basically gifted the championship to Max as well, because Spain wasn't a thing. Think about how close they'd be in the championship. That's all I'm saying. Ultimately, I think Max probably will win the championship anyway. I trust him more than Checo to win it, but it could be a completely different story now. Red Bull will basically be favouring Max already now, and I'm not really a fan of that, unfortunately, but it is what it is. Also, as well as with Lando obviously trying to overcut Alonso, he did come in at the end of lap 20, leaving Ricciardo even more exposed to Gasly. He actually came up 3 cars behind Alonso, which is a massive L from the McLaren point of view. It was about 5 seconds or so the gap, but he was 3 cars behind Fernando Alonso trying to overcut him. So that was his and Ricciardo's race ruined at the time. Well, a chance of scoring pretty big points ruined at the time, which that was a big L from the McLaren team. And then lap 22 got worse as Daniel Ricciardo was passed by Pierre Gasly around the outside of turn 1. We've got a shot of his car porpoising really bad as well, so that which was very uncharacteristic of the McLaren. Obviously, they struggle with porpoising a lot less than other teams like Mercedes, but even they were getting it, showed how aggressive the porpoising was throughout the weekend. Obviously, we talked about it about an hour ago. We were talking about the effect that the porpoising was having on Friday, and it carried on the entire weekend, especially for Lewis as well, which we'll talk about in a minute. But Lewis was really struggling because that Mercedes was it looked like an absolute horror to drive. So obviously earlier I was going on about Lewis Hamilton overtaking Ocon, and said that Tsunoda's move was probably just as good. Well, it actually happened on lap 22 at the end. On the start of lap 22 at turn 3, Yuki Tsunoda, same sort of move on Lewis, not quite as good as Lewis, but it's still a pretty good move from Tsunoda, past Ocon at turn 3. It was a similar move to Lewis, like I said. He got to P7 was Yuki Tsunoda, having a really good race. Obviously not as good as his teammate, but Yuki, the improvement from Yuki is levels above, Mick Schumacher's second season, sophomore season compared to Yuki's. Yuki looks like he could, he's got a pretty big future in Formula 1, whilst Mick Schumacher, I don't even know if he's going to be here next season at this point in time, unfortunately for Mick. So Yuki really impressing me this season. But after P7, pretty good move on Ocon at turn 3. Fair play to him. By lap 23 came on, obviously, a lap later. He had 2 more cars behind him. Obviously, he's going well in sector 3, but the Alpines are sitting duck in sector 1 and 2, really. He's just attracting cars to come at it because of how bad the performance was in sector 1 and 2. I think I saw a thing that in the race, they were 9th in sector 1 and 10th in sector 2, performance-wise, and obviously top in sector 3. Obviously, extreme levels there. But, so that was it. That was an interesting one from Alpine. But, so within a lap, he had 2 more cars on the back of him, Vettel and Zhou Guanyu. Obviously, Vettel again, this time he'd go for a move a little bit more conservative than the next one, but we'll see that in a minute. Meanwhile, as well, obviously Verstappen, who got ahead of Perez before, and obviously had about a 3-second gap or so, it's now 6 seconds, getting over 3 seconds on his teammate, which was interesting. Obviously, Perez not having as good of a race as he did in Monaco, but also not having as good of a race as he did in qualifying in Baku as well. It just wasn't Checo's day, and Max was just on another level yesterday in the race, really. Zhou Guanyu was set for points, but unfortunately... So, I was on about Zhou Guanyu just a minute ago, saying that he was on the back of Ocon. Unfortunately for him, he was told to box, because his Ferrari power unit had also overheated. He was set for points. He was on the back of Esteban Ocon, and unfortunately for him, he was out of the race as well. Zhou Guanyu, I felt so sorry for him. Obviously, the second Ferrari power unit retirement, the third Ferrari powered car to retire as well in this race. It's very similar to Bahrain when it was when obviously all the Red Bulls retired, Red Bull powered cars, Red Bull powertrain powered cars in Bahrain all retired towards the end. Similar to that, but. Yeah, Zhou Guanyu, unfortunately for him, obviously 3rd race in a row that he's retired now as well because of an issue. He's not done anything wrong really. Zhou hasn't, and unfortunately, unfortunately for Zhou Guanyu, he was set for the points. Pretty good points finish as well for him. He was miles better than his teammate Valtteri Bottas all weekend in the Alpha, which looked dead in FP1 and FP2 on Friday, and it was such a shame for him. I felt so sorry for him. What that did do, though, was actually allow Sebastian Vettel to concentrate on Esteban Ocon. It was like deja vu. He set up a move on Ocon at turn 3. It looked easy. He went for a move on the outside this time, but backed off weirdly. I think Paul Resta said it might be another vibration or something. But so unfortunately for Seb, he'd have to go the very next lap. But so Seb backed off that time obviously as well. He didn't want to lock up too. That'd be another thing as well. Obviously if he's getting vibrations from the tyre, if he locks up, then they're fully done. Those tyres are. So that's fair enough. But so Seb would have to wait another lap to get past Ocon. Obviously that'll be his 3rd attempt to try and get past the Alpine at the time as well. At turn 3 as well, where statistically and obviously by looks as well, it looked like it was much easier to pass the Alpine at turn 3 than it was at turn 1. So it was basically the same situation a lap later, setting up at 1, very close at 2, meaning at turn 3 he'd be able to make the move, and this time he got the move done round the outside, and ahead of Esteban Ocon finally on lap 25. Sebastian Vettel had done it. On lap 26 and 27, things weren't looking great for McLaren. On lap 26, Lando still hadn't got past Alex Albon. He was struggling with the hard tyre warm-up and was losing time to Fernando Alonso, really. And Daniel Ricciardo was passed by Lewis Hamilton at the time as well. Obviously, Daniel hasn't stopped yet. Lewis had. But, just not his race, really. Ricciardo basically let Lewis pass. It was an easy move at turn 3, losing a position. Obviously, it's not his race. But, Lewis wasn't Daniel's race. But, just sort of at this point you're just thinking, oh god, what could have been really for him. And also meanwhile as well on lap 27 it got a little bit worse for Lando as well, as Fernando Alonso was up in place of 10th. He outpaced Magnussen down the straight. He was going nicely, and Ocon was next, obviously his teammate who was struggling as well. He hadn't pit yet. Obviously Ocon was going to let Alonso pass eventually too as well. So on lap 27 it was done. Alonso was let pass up to P9 then, meaning there are now 5 cars between him and Lando Norris. Wow. It was now, luckily for Lando, lap 27 was when the hards really started to sort of get up to temperature, and he was starting to get going well on the hards. Got past Alex Albon on the very same lap for lap 14, so it was reduced to 4. Lance Stroll was quickly to be a victim as well. Obviously, Lando getting a groove when it was really needed to sort of chase down Alonso at the time. Obviously, by lap 28, he overtook Stroll at turn 3 as well, so it was down to 3 cars again. But yeah, if only he had sort of made the top. If only Lando had sort of got to a groove with the hard tyres a little bit quicker, it could have been a different story for him, unfortunately. Ocon, obviously, he's just lost position to Alonso. He's at risk to losing position to Kevin Magnussen of the Haas. Ocon is really struggling on these hard tyres that he started the race with, obviously. Alonso's strategy is working a lot more than it is for the Frenchman. And he has Magnussen on the back of him, who's having a really good race up to this point as well. Obviously, he's got a chance at points at this point as well. Magnussen looked to have the edge on Ocon. It looked like he probably was going to do the same that Vettel did, the same that Tsunoda did, the same that Hamilton did. Magnussen was the next person to overtake Ocon. But for him, it looked like he was holding back a little bit. Maybe Ferrari came over to Haas and said, "Oh, make sure to be careful with the power unit, obviously, because Alfa had a retirement and Ferrari had 2 retirements." And then interestingly, he was closer to Ocon on lap 32, just much closer. Had a look at him at turn 3 as well, but it just wasn't quite enough to get the move done on him. And then on the radio, he was told it was critical to get past him. Obviously, I was thinking, oh, this is power unit related. And literally, by the end of the, he didn't even get to the, to cross the line for another lap. By turn 15, his Ferrari power unit, Magnussen's, was done. And unfortunately for him, he was out of the race. Now, he did get to an escape road, so it was only a VSC rather than SC, a red flag, but he was just stopped at the end, at the end of turn 15. And for Magnussen, that is so unlucky. He looks like you're going to get past Esteban Ocon, next thing you're out of the race. Yeah, but you could tell that the Ferrari unit was so wrong when he couldn't get past Ocon at the time, though, because he just didn't have enough when he should have really had enough, because Ocon was struggling like hell, lapping 2 or 3 seconds slower than the majority of the other cars he was at the time. So that was an interesting one. And also whilst this Magnussen and Ocon battle was going on as well, Lewis Hamilton was starting to chase down Pierre Gasly again for P4, whilst Lando Norris overtook Valtteri Bottas for P12. Obviously, Bottas's race is done at this point, and his overtake on Bottas was down the inside of 3. And next up for Lando as well was Magnussen and Ocon. So he was the next one to challenge Ocon after Magnussen's retirement, but. Yeah, unfortunately for Kevin, and he was having a great race as well. Him and Zhou, 2 of them probably could have got points rather than Ocon. They were having better races than Esteban Ocon. One of them would have been in the points positions, I expect. And especially if, the 2 of them as well. Like Magnussen started 16th, Zhou started 14th. The 2 of them were having great races. Up there probably with the drivers of the day at the point as well. Made quite a few overtakes on their rivals. The strategy really working for them as well. The medium hard, the strategy. And yeah, it was unfortunately for the 2 of them, their race was over because of the Ferrari power unit, which has nothing to do with them, obviously. And yeah, obviously the VSC was brought out with the Magnussen stoppage by the escape road in turn 15, so it wouldn't last for very long. But they would still have to. It still was unfortunately the VSC was deployed. So Verstappen and Perez both came in to be safe for the tyres. The Red Bull double stacked. George Russell had enough of a gap to Gasly to come in as well. So just came in to sort of just make sure that the tyres were safe, just to make sure that all 3 of those would get to the end of the race and basically secure in their podium positions as well. After George, next 2 people to come in were Lewis Hamilton and Dan Ricciardo, obviously sitting P5 and 6 at the time. Pierre Gasly actually stayed out in P4, which was an interesting one, but that would sort of make him more vulnerable to when all the other guys' new tyres would warm up. So Ricciardo obviously as well. Ricciardo hadn't stopped yet, so he got helped out a little bit by just going hard medium and stopping in the second VSC. But imagine what could have been if he wasn't held up. Ricciardo could have seriously got P5 or P6, rather than getting P8 like he did. Really, when you think about it, which is unfortunate for him. Crucially for Daniel, he came out ahead of Lando Norris, which obviously a bit of payback from earlier. But he did unfortunately come out behind Fernando Alonso, so the 2 of them really got jumped by Alonso, and it looked like it was the same. It's basically the same story as it was earlier, just Ricciardo chasing Alonso rather than Norris chasing Alonso. So that was going to set up an interesting end to the race. That was obviously we know what happened there really. Esteban Ocon was actually helped out by the safety car as well as Ricciardo. So he came in, got rid of the dusted hard tyres that he was really struggling on, and getting up obviously into a points position as well, because Ocon's race looked dead at this point, but he got helped out by the safety car. And obviously the other hard runners, Bottas and Stroll, also took advantage of the cheap stop as well and came in to change their tyres to the mediums. Vettel and the Aston Martin, Gasly and Tsunoda in the AlphaTauri were risking it by not coming in and going for the one stop, going on to, and also going to the end of the tyres that they made the change to go to in the first VSC on lap 9, so that they were risking it going for the one stop when the majority of them, other than sort of the hard medium runners, were going for a 2 stop. On lap 35, the VSC was over, so we resumed racing again, and Yuki Tsunoda instantly looked up at turn 1, meaning that Lewis Hamilton would have had DRS on the long straight the next time round, and it should be an easy pass. Obviously his tyres were going anyway, but he made the risk keeping him out. But yeah, lucky for Lewis, he was ahead by turn 1 in lap 36, and next up was Gasly, obviously the another AlphaTauri who chose to stay out. who was 10 seconds ahead of him was Pierre Gasly, and that gap was expected to come down pretty quickly. Yuki Tsunoda, by the way, just when he was battling with Lewis, his race got even worse. Obviously he locked up. His tyre was dead, but he's still. He might get point position if he managed. He might be able to get a points position if he managed it. Did Yuki Tsunoda, but unfortunately for him, his DRS flap just broke in half. Yuki's DRS flap just literally broke in half. Only half of it opened, and he had to stop the car. He was showing the black and orange flag to come into the pits. A bit, obviously, he took longer to come in than expected. He came in a couple laps or so later. But yeah, Yuki. I mean, we all thought that he was going to retire the car because his DRS flap literally just broke in half. Like only half of it would open, and the other half was just slammed closed. And yeah, it was just weird. And obviously, I think Paul di Resta at the time was just thinking, he's got a black and orange flag. This is a race over. He's got to come in and retire. But AlphaTauri, when he does pit on lap 38, AlphaTauri, the pit crew just whack out the gaffer tape and take the DRS flap down. Obviously Yuki, you can't use a DRS for the rest of the lap, and then just taping over all the holes and stuff as well from where it might have broken on the other side too, and send him out. Change his tyres too, obviously, because they just locked up. And he went down to P13. Obviously, his race was over at the time. Really, he wasn't going to get points or anything. But I admire it from AlphaTauri. Like, fair enough. That was you don't really see it that very often from from an F1 team. Just thinking, yeah, okay, that's fine. We got a bit of damage. We can't use DRS, but yeah, fuck it. Let's just whack a bit of gaffer tape on. Yeah, fine. Let's get Yuki to the end of the race rather than sort of retiring and save the parts. It's fair enough, but I wouldn't do it. But I do admire it from AlphaTauri. Lap 40 then, obviously 11 laps remaining, so actually 12 laps remaining on lap 40. Daniel Ricciardo was getting so close to Fernando Alonso for P7, but he just couldn't seem to keep up with him through the last sector. Similar story of everyone with the Alpine, really. And unfortunately for McLaren as well, they're quite slow on the straight lines. Even in turn 3, going down the second straight to turn 3, he still couldn't get a move done on Fernando. He was starting to drop back a bit as well to Fernando, and Lando Norris was actually starting to catch him as well, setting up a very interesting end to the race. Only one lap later than on lap 41, obviously, Lando Norris actually asked his engineer to try and get Ricciardo to push up a bit, as he thought that if he doesn't, he might, and as he thought that if he didn't, he might be at risk to losing position to Ocon. Obviously, he was just changed tyres and he's going well on the Alpine behind him, which is fair enough for Lando's point. Like, he probably would have lost position to Ocon if Ricciardo didn't push up a bit to Alonso. Well, if potentially he wouldn't have done, but he potentially could have done if something went wrong. And then Paul di Resta actually brought up the fact here. I thought Paul had a really good race, thinking about it actually, because PDR gets a lot of stick. For me, I like to give him a lot of stick as well, because sometimes I think he's a little bit biased. I think, obviously he's not Martin Brundle, and I think there are probably better pundits out there. Obviously, be interesting to see what goes on with Sky at the moment. Obviously, with the anti-vaxxer Nico Rosberg now not being allowed in the paddock. Obviously, we had him on Zoom one week, which I thought was crap. Obviously, in Monaco it's different because he lives in Monaco, but that's why Sky weren't in the paddock in Monaco, which makes sense now. Obviously, they were on a boat outside, which was very interesting. But yeah, that was an interesting one. Now that everyone knows that Nico Rosberg is an anti-vaxxer, I don't know what's going to happen with Sky really. Obviously, PDR is probably just the other than Jensen maybe. Jensen's always been really good on comms, but I think PDR had a very good commentary race actually, very insightful. Compared to what he normally is. I thought, fair play to him. I got to say fair play to Paul di Resta. I really enjoyed his commentary this week actually, thinking about it. But he normally does back you as well. Obviously, I said I watched 2018 back, and he was commentating on that as well. Obviously, because Martin Brundle does have his break. I think he always misses Hungary as well. And a couple more, so it does make sense. Obviously, Martin, you can't expect him to go to every single race. You just can't. But I think PDR did a very good job by replacing him. As did Johnny Herbert on the grid walk as well. I thought he was really good as well. I love a bit of Johnny. He's awesome. So I thought that was really interesting too. But anyway, going back to Paul di Resta. PDR Paul di Resta brought up the fact that they may switch them to see if Lando can get ahead of Alonso, but if he can't, then they'll switch him back. Which and he said that's fair. That's what that's what they normally do. The team will normally do. And after earlier as well, Ricciardo was asking to get past as well. That seemed like the fair thing to do. Then obviously later on in the race, as we'll get into in a minute, they did say that to Lando. Right, so on lap 43, we saw Max Verstappen told not to use DRS when lapping after the Tsunoda incident. Obviously, that's interesting because there's a lot of theories out there saying that the AlphaTauri and the Red Bull are very similar. You can see that in some areas of the car, especially like the side pods area and stuff as well. Obviously not to the Aston Martin level, but still very similar. And yeah, so Verstappen, just as a precaution, when lapping cars, obviously he's in front, so he's not going to have to overtake anyone. But when lapping cars, he was told not to use DRS by GP. And also on lap 43 as well, Hamilton has basically caught Gasly. He's done 10 seconds in 6 laps. And Gasly stayed ahead of him for one more braking zone at turn 1. Helped out by Latifi when lapping him. But Hamilton will be on it at turn 3. Gasly did a great job at defending at turn 3, actually, to stay ahead, but it's told not to worry about the position, basically saying just get the position to Lewis, saying that time management by his engineer is way more important to last the race and get good points for the team, obviously AlphaTauri. Especially with Tsunoda retiring as well, that was crucial for him. Yeah, so on lap 44, Gasly actually remained in front of Lewis at turn 1, picking up a very good fight on the 7-time world champion. Lewis couldn't make the move around the outside stick at turn 1, but he set up perfectly to make the move at turn 3, getting out to P4, so good job by Lewis there. And on lap 45, just sort of finishing the race here, Paul Russell's McLaren theory was actually right. Lando was told that they'll do that. They'll switch him if he can get as close to Ricciardo as he was to Alonso. And he basically said he'll stop putting more pressure on Ricciardo, and if they do switch, then he'll try and get Alonso, but if they don't, then they'll switch positions back. And more housery here from Fernando Alonso, by the way, because he said that that was all basically all the pace he had. He can't go any quicker, and obviously when towards the end of the race, when the fuel's getting less and less, and when the car's getting lighter, you start to go quicker. Obviously, Verstappen was setting faster sectors, not a fastest lap, interestingly, but he was setting fastest sectors towards the end as well. Alonso was like, "Oh yeah, I'm done here. I can't go any faster," and then the absolute housery to say that, and then just keep setting personal bests. Basically, just baiting out McLaren. I love Fernando for that. That was awesome. Fair play to him. Like, you know what I mean? He's basically saying to the papaya cars, like, yep, okay, you can't go any faster, come and get me. Obviously, have to do it at turn 3 because you can't get past the turn 1. But unfortunately for Lando, he wouldn't have been able to get Fernando, so they just switched them. They just remained in position, and unfortunately, Lando was a bit annoyed about that, saying, "No, it's a bit different than earlier. It's fighting for position rather than fighting towards the start of the race." But yeah. As much as Lando tried to have a go at Daniel, he had to go literally right up to the end of the race, trying to do a Bottas and Stroll for P2 back in the day. But unfortunately for Lando, it wasn't close enough. And it probably best he didn't actually overtake Daniel anyway, because that could have caused chaos towards the race, but he was told not to. But he let him know he was there. But it was Ricciardo who crossed on P8 and Lando Norris in Daniel Norris and Lando Norris in P9. And also, just whilst this sort of this battle's going on with the McLarens and stuff towards the end of the race as well, Lance Stroll retired his oscillations. Obviously, last year happened. I don't think Aston Martin want to go through that again. So so after the oscillations for Stroll, they're just like, fuck it, just we'll bring you in. Your race is over. He was like P15 at the time. Your race is over. You're not going to get points. We may as well just save the car from what happened last year. So Lance Stroll did retire on that 48 too. But anyway, so that meant that Max Verstappen had won the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. A great performance from Max overall. I'll grade him in a minute. But initial thoughts, let's just sort of go through the classification before I sort of do the grading of the drivers. So obviously Verstappen won the race. 2 pit stops in P1. Outstanding race from him. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Perez in P2. Fair play. Russell P3. Completing the podium. Lewis Hamilton in P4, so it was Red Bull, Mercedes. Behind the 2 Mercedes, it was the AlphaTauri of Pierre Gasly, obviously, in P5. A great result from him. Obviously, Tsunoda's kind of outperformed in this season, as Tsunoda. So Gasly getting one up on his teammate, and obviously his teammate did unfortunately finish P13. But yeah, that was a great performance from Pierre, really. Vettel in P6, Alonso P7, Ricciardo P8, Lando Norris P9, and Esteban Ocon P10, making up the top 10. So obviously Alpine and McLaren not really being in there is not really a surprise. Sorry, the Aston Martin and Seb is there though, and you've got to applaud Seb for getting P6 and the Aston Martin, like, fair play. And then the last remaining finishers, the last 6 were Bottas in 11th, Albon 12th, Senna 13th, 14th Schumacher, 15th Latifi, and 16th Stroll. Obviously Magnussen, Zhou, Leclerc, and Sainz not finishing the race. Going into the standings of the championships before grading drivers towards the end. Obviously the drivers' championship, the leader Max Verstappen. He's ahead by 21 points over his teammate Sergio Perez now, which is an interesting one. It could be a little bit less if Spain didn't happen, but obviously I'm not going to let that go. Charles Leclerc obviously down to P3 in the championship after his retirement, 13 points behind Perez now, and 34 points behind Verstappen, as I was saying earlier. George Russell, P4, only 17 points behind Charles Leclerc is mad to think, but obviously he's finished in the top 5 in every single race. And the fact that Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari is 16 points off him as well is mental thinking about it. Obviously, Carlos has been incredibly unlucky, and George has been incredibly lucky, really, that they sort of make up the top 5 in the drivers' standings. Obviously, the big mover as well is Pierre Gasly picking up into the P10 with his big points, finishing P5. And in the team championship as well, in the Constructors' Championship, there's now an 80-point lead for Red Bull, which is crucial. It's basically locking up the Constructors' Championship for them, really. Obviously, 1-2 in the drivers at the moment as well. But it looks like Red Bull are going to win the Constructors. Obviously, they didn't win it last year. It was Mercedes that won it last year. So getting their first Constructors since 2013 will be very big for Red Bull, if that is the case. Like it probably looks like it will be. And then Alpine overtook Alfa Romeo with the double points per finish from Alonso and Ocon as well. That was the other big movement, going up to P5 in the Constructors now. So the top 5 in the Constructors: Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, and then McLaren. But McLaren about 100 points behind Mercedes. Interestingly, though, Mercedes are only 30 points behind Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship, which is mad. Because if Merc pick up, the pace that they're expected to, obviously, I think they want to be challenging by Silverstone, which obviously with it being a race away, obviously Canada in between, I don't think that's going to happen. But if they are quick towards the end of the season, could Mercedes potentially finish above Ferrari in the Constructors? It really is possible. Ferrari are closer to Mercedes in the Constructors than they are Red Bull at the point. 30 points compared to 80 points. They're twice as close as they are, almost 3 times as close as they are to Mercedes than they are to Red Bull. It's just mad to think. But anyway, the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, it wasn't as good as any other race at Baku. Unfortunately, the last couple have been absolute bangers, so obviously it kind of does have to live up to those as well. On a whole, though, we were sort of robbed off a fight for the wins. That's why it was a bit dead as well. But there's plenty of overtakings. I'll probably give the race a 5 out of 10. But no, actually, I'll give it a 6 out of 10. But this could have been a banger, even without sort of incidents, if the Ferraris were in it. We saw great battling in the midfield, so I'll probably give it a 6 overall. Some people are giving it like 3s and 4s, as I've seen on social media, but I can't do that. I'm afraid I really enjoyed this race, other than the lack of fight at the front of the grid. But yeah, I'll give it a 6 overall. And without further ado, let's get into grading the drivers. So you know the drill by now. I'm going to go through every driver in the classification order and grade their entire weekend, and just give basically my thoughts on their weekend as a whole, before rounding up the podcast at the end. So let's go for that now. So obviously Verstappen, I'm gonna give Max it's an interesting one when you think about it, because quality was beaten by Checo, but I'm gonna give him an A. I'm gonna give Max a B. I'm gonna give Max a B because he got beaten by his teammate in qualifying, but he was flawless on Sunday, so I'll give him a B. Perez, I'll give Perez a B as well, just be fair, because it's the same, it's the opposite of him. He was great in quali, but unfortunately wasn't as good as him on Sunday. So I'll give him a B. George, A, instantly. We didn't even really talk about George, he was just sat in P3, the P4 before, P5, then P4, then P3. But in a race of his own, really, 25 seconds off Perez, 25 seconds off Lewis, 26 seconds off Lewis in P4. He was just in a race of his own, just sort of sat there. Obviously Lewis struggling with the cars as well, with more as well, than George. George has just sort of come into Mercedes and just been Mr. Consistency, really. Everything we thought he'd be at Mercedes and more, really, as well. So I'll give George an A. Awesome weekend for him. Lewis, I'm going to give Lewis an A as well, although he did get out qualified by George and was 25 or so seconds off him in the race, still getting that P4. Obviously, had quite a few overtakes as well. The best move of the weekend on Ocon at turn 3 as well. And he won driver of the day, and that's fair enough as well, because after seeing him get out of that car, Lewis couldn't really move. He lost. I forgot to put this in my notes, but he literally lost the feeling to his back. He said the seat's gone cold, sort of like a numbness, with about 5 or 6 laps left to go in the race. That's scary. The porpoising is this scary, and it's doing it to him. This is just something's going to happen soon with the porpoising. I think every driver agrees that something has to be done, but Alonso, which is interesting as well. I'm hardly surprised by that with Fernando, especially. Yeah, I'm hardly surprised by it. Everything about Fernando, I'm hardly surprised by that. But yeah, so I'll give Lewis an A as well. Pierre, I'll give Pierre an A. As I will with Vettel as well. I'll speak about the two of them really here. Yeah, I mean, for Pierre, a great redemption. Obviously, been off it all year really, and with talks to him maybe leaving AlphaTauri to go somewhere like Aston Martin or maybe even McLaren if they get rid of Ricciardo, which I don't think we will do. But yeah, Pierre's Pierre's being mentioned a lot in the driver market at the moment. Maybe in a move to Williams potentially. I don't think he would do it, but just to get out of the Red Bull family. Yeah, Pierre, a good solid weekend for him. Obviously making the one-stop work as Vettel did as well in P6. Seb, yeah, he's been on another level to Lance recently, and you can tell why him and Alonso in P6 and 7 are both obviously they got 6 world championships between them. You can tell why. Like they're both wily old foxes, and they've in F1 terms, and they guide themselves to P6 and P7 when the McLarens in 8th and 9th were a lot faster. So I'll give the two of them. I'll give them both. I'll give Seb a B because obviously he made a mistake in qualifying. Not qualifying. Sorry, actually he did make the mistake in qualifying, but that wasn't really the fault of the understeer. But in the race as well, obviously with the Ocon move, I'll give Seb a B. I'll give Fernando. No, I'll give Fernando an A. Out qualifying a teammate. Being the absolute shithouse he's been. Obviously, I've been watching a bit of the Peter Crouch podcast lately. Also, listening obviously as well, but mainly listening. But yeah, I've using the word housery quite a lot. But the housery from Fernando Alonso, you got to commend it. Honestly, you got to applaud the housery from Fernando Alonso. Is fair play to him. Like, do you know what I mean? Like fair play. Yeah, Fernando, I'll give you an A. Ricardo, I'm gonna give Daniel Rick and I'm gonna give Daniel Rick and Lando both Bs. Obviously, Lando better in qualifying, Daniel Becker better in the race, sort of levels out really, give them both Bs. Ocon, I'm going to give Ocon a B, off Alonso. No, I'm going to give Ocon a C. Off Alonso, not great qualifying, kind of slow in the race as well, but lucked into it in the safety car. Yeah, I'll give Ocon a C. Bottas, I'll give Bottas a C as well. Somehow I got P11 just from all the retirements, but yeah, Bottas was not where he had been pretty much all weekend. Alex Albon, I'm going to give Albon a B. Dominated Latifi all weekend. I'll give Albon a B. He's been as solid as he has been all season, really. Tsunoda, I'll give Tsunoda a B because he was up there with Gasly, and although he did lock up, and the DRS wasn't his fault, he would be in the points. So I'll give Tsunoda a B. That's not really his fault. Mick Schumacher, C. Off it from Magnussen. Back of the grid in quali. I think he's over. His career really could even be over potentially. I hope not, but just not happening for Mick at the moment. Latifi, again, I give him a C. Got dominated by Albon, and then Stroll after. He finished final. He did get classified actually because he retired at the end. But yeah, Stroll. I'll give Stroll a C because he did get dominated by Vettel again, just over the time and everything. But I'll give Stroll a C as well. So that wraps up the grading of the drivers and also the SJMoores podcast obviously this week as well. I hope you did really enjoy it. Again, apologies for the hat. I might be blocking the camera or anything, but my trim is dead at the moment. And obviously, I think a lot of you are probably listening on the platforms anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But anyway, that is the end of the SJMoores podcast for this week, episode 9. I'll be back this time next week for the Canada Grand Prix, the Canadian Grand Prix, Montreal, obviously. One of my favourite tracks of the calendar. Obviously, I've not been there since 2019 either. There'll be a lot of talk about the Seb and Lewis incident in 2019, obviously, where he made the move on the grass in 2019. There'll be a lot of talk about that going into the race on Sunday. I think Seb will probably do a little bit of an interview, maybe like Nat or Rachel Brooks or someone going into it. But I really enjoyed the Azerbaijan Grand Prix from some aspects. It was other aspects it wasn't very good. But overall, a 6 out of 10, like I said. And I hope you enjoyed listening to me talk about it. So without further ado, that is the end of the SJMoores podcast. Thank you for watching or listening, whatever you are streaming on today. Have a good rest of the day. Goodbye.